My name is Grace Townsend, and I'm 26 years old. Last Christmas Eve, my grandfather sat down at my father's dinner table, carved a slice of turkey, looked at me across the mashed potatoes, and asked a question so simple it nearly broke the room in half. "So, Gracie, did you ever fix up that back porch? The house has good bones, but that porch needed work." I set my fork down. "What house, Grandpa? 9 people at that table. Nobody moved." My father's hand froze around his wine glass. My stepmother gripped the edge of the tablecloth like she was trying to keep the whole evening from sliding off. One question from my grandfather unraveled 2 years of lies and changed every single thing I believed about my family. Before I take you back to that night, please take a moment to like and subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to Tuesday in March 18 years ago, the day my mother stopped breathing and my father started disappearing. My mother died on a Tuesday in March and the rain didn't stop for 6 days. Her name was Ellen Hartley before she married my father. She taught 3rd grade at Meadowbrook Elementary and had a laugh that carried through walls. Every Sunday, she'd pull out a wooden recipe box, oak worn smooth at the corners, and let me pick which card we'd cook from. I always picked the tomato sauce. She always pretended she didn't know I would. I was 8 when the cancer took her. Lung cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it. She never smoked a day in her life. The doctors used the word unlucky like it was supposed to explain something. After the funeral, my father went quiet. Not angry, not cruel, just gone. He started working late at the auto shop, then later at the dealership, then later still at wherever men go when they can't stand the silence of a house that used to have a voice in it. I'd hear his truck pull into the driveway at 11, sometimes midnight. He'd open the fridge, stand there in the blue light for a while, close it, and go to bed. Grandpa Will, my mother's father, stepped in the way a retaining wall steps in when the soil starts to shift. Every Friday afternoon, his old Ford pickup would idle in our driveway, and I'd climb into the passenger seat with my backpack and a change of clothes. His house smelled like sawdust and coffee. He'd been a general contractor for 40 years, built half the porches in our county and had hands like sandpaper from decades of measuring, cutting, and fitting things together. On those weekends, he taught me how to regrout tile, how to change a faucet washer, how to use a level. He told me stories about my mother when she was my age, how she'd bring him lemonade on job sites, how she was always rescuing stray cats and finding them homes. "Your mother never asked for permission to be strong," he said once, screwing a hinge back into a cabinet door. "She just was." He said something else that stuck with me, though I didn't understand it at the time. We were sitting on his porch watching a late summer thunderstorm roll in, and he squeezed my shoulder. "I'll make sure you're taken care of, Gracie. That's a promise." I was 9 years old. I didn't know what he meant. I wouldn't understand for another 17 years. Pamela Fletcher arrived in our house the way a new season arrives. Slowly, then all at once until you can't remember what it felt like before. My father introduced her 2 years after my mother died. I was 10. She had auburn hair, a wide smile, and a habit of tilting her head when she listened to you. Like everything you said was the most interesting sentence she'd ever heard. She brought me a stuffed bear the first time she came to dinner. She cooked pot roast. She reorganized the hall closet. For 6 months, I believed it. Then the small rearrangement started. My bedroom, the one next to my parents' room, the one where my mother used to tuck me in, became the guest room. I was moved down the hall. Just until we sort out the nursery situation, Pamela said, pressing her hand to her stomach. She was pregnant with Bridget. I never moved back. The photographs shifted, too. My mother's face, which had hung in the living room and the stairway and the kitchen, gradually disappeared, replaced by new portraits. Richard and Pamela at the beach. Richard and Pamela at a restaurant. Richard and Pamela holding baby shoes up to the camera. In every frame, 2 people starting over. In none of them, the daughter from the chapter they'd rather skip. Pamela wasn't cruel in any way you could point to. She didn't yell. She didn't insult me. She was simply warm when there was an audience. Grandpa Will, the neighbors, the church group, and room temperature when there wasn't. She'd ask Bridget what she wanted for dinner and then serve whatever she decided as though my chair at the table were decorative. She'd plan family outings and mention them at breakfast the morning after they happened. My father didn't stop her. He didn't encourage it either. He just occupied the narrow space between the woman he'd married and the daughter he didn't know how to face. And he chose the path of least resistance every single time. I wasn't angry at him. You can't be angry at someone for drowning when they never learned to swim. But I noticed the way Pamela smiled at me. Polite, brief, already moving on. The way you smile at someone else's child in a grocery store. She didn't push me out. She just rearranged the furniture until there was no room left. The year Bridget was born, I learned that love in our house had a budget, and I was the line item that kept getting cut. I was 12. Bridget Renee Townsend arrived in January, 7 lb 4 Oz, and my father transformed overnight into a man I barely recognized. He held her constantly. He took photos. He posted them online with captions like, "My whole world." Which, if you did the math, left me somewhere outside the frame. Bridget got the biggest bedroom. I got moved to the finished basement, a room with one window, a bare bulb overhead, and the water heater humming through the drywall. It has its own bathroom, Pamela pointed out, as if plumbing were a substitute for belonging. You'll love the privacy. I was 12. I didn't want privacy. I wanted someone to notice I was being buried. Bridget was enrolled in ballet at 4, soccer at 5, piano at 6. Every season brought a new activity, a new uniform, a new round of applause from Richard and Pamela in the front row. Nobody asked me if I wanted to do anything. I suspect nobody thought to. The one constant in those years was Grandpa Will. He drove up from his place every month, always on the third Saturday, always with 2 gifts. One for me, one for Bridget, equal, wrapped in the same paper. He was the only person in that house who treated us like we came from the same family. One Thanksgiving, after Pamela spent 20 minutes showing off Bridget's piano recital video, Grandpa Will turned to me at the kitchen sink where I was rinsing dishes nobody had asked me to rinse. "You doing all right, Gracie?" "I'm fine, Grandpa." He studied me the way he studied a wall before deciding whether to knock it down or reinforce it. "Just wait," he said, winking. Good things take time. Later that evening, when Pamela was putting Bridget to bed and Richard was watching football, Grandpa Will pulled me aside on the back porch. "When you turn 21, he said, voice low, "I have something for you, something your mother wanted you to have." "What is it?" "Patience, kiddo," he squeezed my hand. I didn't push it, but I carried that sentence around like a stone in my pocket for the next 9 years. Small enough to forget about, heavy enough to always feel. At 16, I had 2 jobs, 1 bus pass, and the growing suspicion that being invisible was not the same thing as being safe. I worked mornings at a coffee shop before school, weekends at a dry cleaner, folding other people's clothes. I bought my own textbooks. I packed my own lunches. I rode the 715 bus because nobody offered to drive me, and after a while I stopped expecting them to. That same year, my father sank his savings into an auto repair shop on Route 9, Towns and Motorworks. He talked about it like it was the beginning of something. New lifts, a paint booth, a sign with his name in red letters. Pamela encouraged it loudly. She talked about expansion, about hearing a bookkeeper, about the future like it was a room she was already decorating. What she didn't talk about were the invoices piling up in the kitchen drawer or the phone calls at midnight that woke me in the basement. Through the thin ceiling, I could hear them arguing. Not the words, just the rhythm. Sharp, fast, circular. The sound of 2 people who knew they were in trouble and were busy deciding whose fault it was. I graduated high school on a Friday in June. Grandpa Will sat in the front row, arrived 40 minutes early, and clapped louder than anyone. My father showed up late, somewhere in the back, and left before the reception. Pamela didn't come at all. She said Bridget had a stomach bug. I didn't check. I enrolled at community college that fall. Business administration because it was practical and because the tuition was something I could cover with the coffee shop wages if I added a few evening shifts. I lived at home, but Pamela made sure the arrangement felt transactional. "You're an adult now," she said one morning, sliding a sticky note across the counter. On it, a dollar amount. "Your share of groceries. It's only fair." I paid it every month without argument. The auto shop closed the following spring. I didn't learn the full number until much later, but my father owed $180,000 to the bank, to suppliers, to a landlord who'd trusted a handshake. He took a job managing a used car lot, and I heard him on the phone that first night telling someone, "We'll figure it out." I didn't know about the debt yet. Nobody did, but I could hear it at 2 in the morning through the walls in voices that thought everyone was asleep. I moved into my studio apartment on a Saturday, and for the first time in my life, the silence felt like something I chose. I was 22. I'd finished my associate degree, landed a job as an office coordinator at a small insurance firm, 40 hours a week, decent benefits, enough to cover $950 a month in rent if I didn't eat out, and kept the thermostat at 64. The apartment was 300 ft of carpet, drywall, and a kitchen the size of a coat closet. I loved every inch of it. What I didn't love was how quiet the phone got. My father called maybe 4 times that first year. Short calls just checking in, calls that lasted 90 seconds and covered nothing. He never asked about my job or my apartment or whether I was eating enough. He asked if I was doing okay, the way you ask someone you pass in a hallway, already walking before the answer lands. I tried calling Grandpa Will. I tried a lot. The number I had went to voicemail every time. A generic recording, no name, I left messages. "Hey, Grandpa, just wanted to hear your voice. Call me when you can." He never called back. I asked my father about it. He said Grandpa Will had gone to Florida for his knees. Arthritis, physical therapy, warm weather. He's fine, resting. Don't worry about it. I believed him because what was the alternative? That the last person who remembered my mother's laugh had simply decided to stop remembering mine. I told myself he was just old. It was easier than the other possibility. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn for another 2 years, was that Pamela had given Grandpa Will a wrong phone number for me. She told him I'd changed my cell. The number she provided belonged to nobody. And when Grandpa Will asked Richard about me, Richard said, "She's doing great, Pop. Real busy. Doesn't want to be bothered." Meanwhile, Grandpa Will had signed over a house to my father. The house on Burwood Lane, a 3-bedroom colonial he bought decades ago, once owned by my great-grandmother. He had also transferred $400,000 into my father's account with a single instruction. Give it to Grace. My father signed the papers. He said he would. On my 24th birthday, a card arrived from Grandpa Will 3 months late, forwarded twice. Inside, in his steady handwriting, "I hope you love the new place, Gracie." I read it twice, decided his memory was slipping, pinned it to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, and went to bed. The email arrived on December 19th. 14 words from a woman who hadn't spoken tone in over a year. Christmas Eve dinner at our place. 6:00 p.m. bring nothing. It wouldn't feel like Christmas without you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Pamela's tone was syrup, the kind of warmth she poured on thick when she needed something to look a certain way. I almost deleted it. Almost. Then I saw the second line. Grandpa Will confirmed he's coming too. I called Aunt Carolyn that evening, my mother's younger sister, the one who showed up to my graduation with flowers when nobody else brought any. Will's back from Florida. Carolyn said for a couple months. "Grace, that man has been asking about you every single week. Calling Richard, calling Pamela. They kept telling him you were busy." My hand tightened around the phone. "Every week, every single one, he's worried sick. He thinks you've been avoiding him." I sat on the edge of my bed, and the math rearranged itself in my stomach. 2 years of silence, 2 years of thinking my grandfather had forgotten me, while he spent those same 2 years thinking I was the one who'd walked away. Someone had built that wall between us, and I was starting to understand who held the bricks. Go see him, Grace. Caroline said, whatever's going on in that house will needs to see your face. I said yes to the RSVP before I could change my mind. Hope is a terrible negotiator. It takes whatever it can get. The night before Christmas Eve, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my studio apartment. I didn't own much worth wearing, but I'd kept one thing through every move, every downsized closet, every purge. A cable knit sweater my mother had made by hand the winter before she got sick. Cream-cold wool, slightly uneven at the hem where she'd miscounted the stitches, with a tiny embroidered E at the inside collar. Ellen. I pulled it over my head. It still smelled faintly of cedar from the box I kept it in. I didn't know that Pamela had invited me for the same reason she'd always kept me close enough to photograph, because Grandpa will was watching and the show needed its full cast. I was the prop she couldn't afford to leave off stage, but I didn't go for her. I went for him. The house I grew up in was gone. In its place stood something shinier, newer, and paid for with money I would later learn was mine. I pulled into the driveway at 10 minutes to 6. The first thing I noticed was the SUV, pearl white, current model year, parked next to my father's truck, like it belonged there more than I did. The second thing was the house itself. New siding, new windows. The garage had been widened to fit 2 cars. The front porch, the one that used to sag on the left side, the one my mother used to joke would outlive us all out of spite, had been rebuilt with fresh lumber and a stained railing. I did the math in my head. My father managed a used car lot. Pamela worked part-time at a dentist's office. The auto shop had folded 4 years ago with 6 figures in debt. None of this added up. Inside, it added up even less. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The living room furniture was new: a sectional sofa, a glass coffee table, a flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. A Christmas tree touched the ceiling wrapped in gold ribbon and white lights with matching ornaments that looked like they came from a catalog. Pamela greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted 3 seconds too long. Grace, sweetheart, you look wonderful. She smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, the same candle scent my mother used to light on Christmas Eve. The realization passed through me like a draft. Bridget was on the couch, earbuds in, scrolling her phone. She glanced up. Hey, then back down. She was 14, tall for her age, wearing a sweater that probably cost more than my grocery budget. I walked through the living room and stopped at the bookshelf. 3 small framed photos sat on the second shelf. Me standing with the family at a barbecue. Me at Bridget's birthday party. Me at a lake, arm around Pamela, everyone smiling. I didn't remember any of these moments. Not the barbecue, not the party, not the lake. The images looked right, but something about my face in each one felt slightly misaligned, like a window that won't quite sit flush in its frame. On top of the kitchen cabinet, half hidden behind a stack of napkins, I caught a glimpse of something else. A small wooden box, oak, worn smooth at the corners. I knew that box. I knew it the way you know your own handwriting. Pamela draped a dish towel over it, casual as weather. Let me get you something to drink. Pamela had set the table for 9, but the way she'd arranged the chairs, you'd think there were only 8 people worth sitting near. I was at the far end between an empty seat and the wall. Aunt Carolyn arrived next, took one look at my placement, and dragged her chair directly beside mine. Uncle Dennis followed, nodding at me, settling in with the quiet authority of a man who preferred listening to performing. Richard sat at the head. He looked older than I remembered, grayer at the temples, thinner in the face. He greeted me with a half hug and a glad you could make it, then busied himself with the wine opener like it required his complete engineering attention. 2 of Richard's friends rounded out the table. Eid Peasell and his wife Dana. Eid ran the body shop next to the old dealership. He shook my hand and said, "Good to see you, Grace. Been a while." Dana smiled and said nothing. Pamela presided. She circulated with appetizers, refillage glasses without being asked, and narrated Bridget's accomplishments like a highlight reel. Bridget had made honor roll. Bridget was applying to a boarding school in Connecticut. Bridget's piano teacher said she had real promise. And Grace, Pamela said, turning to me with a smile so polished it could reflect light, How's the insurance office? Fine. That's wonderful. She moved on. The question had been a courtesy, not an inquiry. It lasted exactly as long as she needed it to. Caroline leaned over. How's my girl? Really? Something in my chest cracked, just a little. It had been a long time since anyone asked that question and waited for the actual answer. I'm okay, I said. Better now. She squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back. Some conversations don't need words. Bridget tilted her head from across the table. Dad said, you still rent. She paused. That's so brave. The table flinched. Pamela murmured. Bridget, in the same tone you'd use to gently correct a puppy. A reprimand shaped like a performance, not a correction. I didn't answer. Bridget was 14. She didn't know any better. She was just repeating the altitude her parents had trained her to fly at. Then the doorbell rang. It was 7:42. Pamela's face did something fast. A flash of tightness around the jaw, gone before anyone else could catch it. But I caught it. Everything that happened after that started with the sound of that bell. Grandpa Will walked through the front door carrying a bag of gifts in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other. The gifts were for Christmas. The briefcase was for something else. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him 2 years and 4 months ago at a diner off the interstate. The last meal we'd shared before he left for Florida. His hair had gone full silver and he moved a step slower, but his eyes were the same, sharp, steady, the eyes of a man who measured twice before he cut anything. He saw me and stopped in the doorway. Gracie, I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. He crossed the room in 4 steps and wrapped his arms around me, and I pressed my face into his shoulder and smelled sawdust and Old Spice and something that might have been cedar. The same as always, the same as every Friday afternoon in that pickup truck. Let me look at you. He held me at arm's length, his voice caught. You look just like her. I couldn't speak. He pulled me back in and I let myself be held the way I hadn't been held in 2 years. The way that means someone is actually glad you exist. He greeted the rest of the table with the economy of a man who'd spent 50 years running job sites. A nod to Carolyn and Dennis, a handshake for Ede, a polite Pamela that carried no warmth but no hostility either. He asked Bridget about school. She answered politely. He said, good. Richard got a look, just a look. The kind of father gives a son when something is pending between them. Richard looked away first. Grandpa Will took the empty seat beside me and set the briefcase on the floor next to his share. Close within reach. The way a carpenter sets his toolbox when he knows a job is coming. While Pamela added a place setting, bustling and over-smiling, Grandpa Will leaned toward me. His voice was low, just for the two of us. I tried calling you Gracie for months. The number your father gave me didn't work. My stomach dropped. I never changed my number, Grandpa. His jaw tightened, not surprise, confirmation. His hand found mine under the table, rough, calloused, steady. But his fingers trembled just once and he understood. It wasn't weakness. He set the briefcase beside his chair the way he used to set his level on a beam. Precise, deliberate, ready. The question came between the turkey and the cranberry sauce, and it landed on that table heavier than anything Pamela had served. We were midway through the main course. Pamela had just brought out the gravy boat. Bridget was telling Ede's wife about her boarding school application. Richard was pouring his 3rd glass of wine, which was 2 more than I'd ever seen him drink at dinner. The room hummed with the comfortable noise of silverware and small talk, and a family pretending everything was fine. Grandpa Will cut a piece of turkey, chewed, set his knife down. Then he looked across the table at me, smiled the way he always smiled, warm, unhurried, and said it. So, Gracie, did you ever fix up that back porch? The house has good bones, but that porch needed work when I signed it over. The sentence landed like a stone in still water. I set my fork down. What house, Grandpa? Silence. That kind of silence where you can hear the candle on the centerpiece burning, the wick ticking down, the wax pooling. He leaned forward. The house on Burwood Lane, Grace. I signed the deed over to your father 2 years ago for you. He said it the way he'd read a blueprint. Factual, precise, no room for interpretation. Along with the savings account, $400,000. I heard Carolyn inhale. I heard Dennis set his fork down. I heard Bridget stop mid-sentence. I looked at my father, I never received anything. Richard didn't move. His hand was still wrapped around his wine glass. He stared at a spot on the tablecloth like he was trying to bore a hole through it with his eyes. Grandpa Will turned his head slowly. Not fast, not dramatic, just the measured rotation of a man aiming a flashlight into a dark room. He looked at my father. Richard. My father's throat worked. No sound came out. Pamela's knuckles had gone white around the edge of the table. The gravy boat she'd been holding wastilting. A thin line of brown liquid tracing down the porcelain rim. She didn't notice. Grandpa Will didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just looked at my father the way you look at a crack in a foundation, measuring exactly how deep the damage goes. Where's her house, Richard? My father lied the way he did everything. Poorly halfway and hopping someone else would finish the job for him. Dad, there was a misunderstanding. His voice cracked on the second word. He set the wine glass down too hard and our crescent sloshed onto the tablecloth. We were holding it for Grace until she was ready. She's been so busy with work and the move. Pamela jumped in seamless the way a relay runner grabs the baton. We didn't want to overwhelm her. She's so young and managing a property at 24. The taxes alone. Grandpa Will raised one hand. The room went silent again. I signed those papers in April 2 years ago. His voice was level, measured. A contractor reading measurements off a tape. I told you to give them to Grassa that month. You told me you would. Richard opened his mouth, closed it. What house, Richard? Caroline's voice came from my left, thin and tight. Dennis put a hand on her shoulder, but his eyes stayed on my father, cold and unblinking. It's not what it looks like, Richard started. Then what does it look like? Ede Piecel leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Dana had stopped eating entirely. We were going to tell her. Pamela's eyes were wet now, but I'd seen this performance before. Every argument with Richard, every time Grandpa Will asked why I hadn't called, every parent-teacher conference where she needed to appear softer than she was. She dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin. The napkin stayed dry. When, I said. Pamela blinked. When were you going to tell me? She didn't have an answer. Richard didn't either. He sat in his chair and sweated through his collar while 8 people stared at him across a table set with his daughter's money. I looked down at my plate. The china was new cream with gold trim. The napkin rings were monogrammed. The wine was from a bottle that cost more than my weekly groceries. 22 months of ramen and overtime. That's what $400,000 looked like when someone else decided you weren't ready for it. I'd been skipping coffee with coworkers to save $3 while my father ate off plates that my inheritance had paid for. I didn't cry. I think that scared them more. Grandpa Will open that briefcase the way he used to open his toolbox. No rush, no drama, just a man reaching for exactly the right instrument. He pushed his plate aside. The briefcase came up onto the table, brass clasps clicking open in the quiet room. He pulled out a manila folder, thick, well-organized, tabbed, and laid it between the mashed potatoes and the cranberry sauce. Deed of transfer, he said, sliding the first page forward. Signed by me, countersigned by Richard Townsend, dated April 23rd. He turned to the next document. Bankware confirmation $400,000 from my account to yours, Richard. Same date. Memo line reads for Grace Townsend House and Transition Fund. He pulled out one more sheet, a printed email. He read it aloud, his voice steady as a plumb line. Richard just checking in. Did Grace get the house keys and account details? Want to make sure everything's settled. He paused, looked at my father. Your reply. April 30th. All taken care of, Pop. She's thrilled. Richard's face was the color of old cement. Pamela had stopped crying. She sat rigidly, her performance abandoned, a woman running calculations behind her eyes. Ede stood up first. His chair barked against the hardwood. Richard, what the hell is this? Dennis spoke next slower. The way a man speaks when he's choosing his words with the care of someone who used to manage contracts. This isn't a family disagreement, Richard. This is a deed and a bank transfer. This is a legal matter. Carolyn turned to Pamela. You knew. Pamela said nothing. Her silence was its own answer. Grandpa Will close the folder. He didn't slam it. He placed it flat on the table, square and even, the way he'd set a finished blueprint. "I didn't come here to make a scene," he said. "I came here to give my granddaughter her Christmas." He looked at Richard, not with rage, not with disgust, but with the patient disappointment of a man who trusted someone to carry a load and watch them drop it. "But I need to understand where her house went." He folded his hands. "So tell me, son, where did it go?" My father opened his mouth, and for the first time in my life, I watched him reach for Thetruth, not because he wanted to, but because every single lie had already been used. My father confessed the way concrete cracks, slowly under pressure and never in a straight line. The shop went under. His voice came out raw, stripped of the polish he usually tried to lacquer onto his sentences. "I owed $180,000. The bank was going to take this house. Pamela said, 'Don't.'" Pamela's voice cut across the table, sharp and clean. "Don't you put this on me, Richard. You said we could use it temporarily. I said we needed time. You made the decision." Grandpa will watch them the way a surveyor watches two walls leaning toward each other, measuring how long before the whole thing comes down. "Did you use the money, Richard?" he asked. My father closed his eyes, nodded. "All of it." A longer pause, then another nod. The room exhaled. Ede's wife, Dana, pressed her napkin to her mouth. Caroline's fingers dug into the tablecloth. Dennis sat perfectly still, his jaw set like concrete. I spoke. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but in that silence it carried. The renovations, Bridget's school, the car in the driveway. I pointed toward the living room, the new furniture, the Christmas tree ornaments that match. That was my money. Richard didn't answer. That was my money. It wasn't a question anymore. Pamela tried once more. "We were going to tell you, Grace. We were planning when one word, 5 letters. She didn't have an answer." I looked around the table, the gold-rimmed plates, the crystal wine glasses, the professionally wrapped gifts stacked under a tree that probably cost $200. All of it purchased with money a 74-year-old man had set aside for his granddaughter because her mother had died and nobody else was looking out for her. I watched my father shrink, not physically. He was still the same 6-foot man in the same pressed shirt, but something behind his eyes folded inward like a house settling on a bad foundation. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever sat at a table and realized the people around it weren't who you thought they were, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We're not done yet. Grandpa will reach down and picked up the manila folder. He wasn't finished, and neither was the truth. The photographs were the detail that turned theft into something worse. Theft is about money. The photographs were about erasing a person. Grandpa will stood up from the table. Not fast. He was 74 with bad knees, but with the deliberate motion of a man walking a job site, checking corners. He moved to the bookshelf in the living room. 9 sets of eyes followed him. He picked up one of the small framed photographs. Me at a lake standing next to Pamela, both of us smiling. "This was last July," he said, turning it toward the table. "You sent this to me, Pamela. You said the whole family spent the weekend at Crystal Lake." I shook my head. "I wasn't at any lake last July. I worked a double shift on Saturday and spent Sunday doing laundry." Caroline was already on her feet. She took the frame from Grandpa Will and tilted it under the dining room chandelier, studying it the way a jeweler studies a setting. "The lighting on Grace is different," she said. "Everyone else has light coming from the right. Grace has it from the left." She looked up. "This is photoshopped." The second photograph. Me at Bridget's birthday party. Same problem. Different angle of shadow. Slightly different resolution around my shoulders. The third. A family barbecue. I was wearing a blouse I donated to Goodwill 3 years ago. Pamela sat frozen. Her mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. "You fabricated evidence that my granddaughter was part of this family," Grandpa Will said. He set the frame down on the table gently the way you set down something breakable. "While you were spending her money, the room absorbed it." Ede looked at Richard like he was seeing him for the first time. Dana covered her mouth with both hands. Dennis was already reaching for his phone. Instinct maybe, or the reflex OFA man who understood that certain moments needed to be documented. Bridget was crying, real tears. Not her mother's careful performance, but the ugly, uncontrolled crying of a teenager whose world had just rearranged itself without her consent. "Mom," she said. Pamela didn't look at her. "Mom, is that true?" Pamela stared at the tablecloth, and Bridget learned something that night that most people take decades to understand, that silence from certain people is a louder confession than words. I stood up and the chair scraped against the hardwood floor. It was the loudest sound in the room. Ede and Dana had already gathered their coats. Ede paused at the door, looked at Richard, and said, "Call me when you figured out what kind of man you want to be." Then he left. The dining room was smaller now. Richard at the head bowed, Pamela rigid, jaw locked. Bridget curled into herself, arms crossed, tears still running. Carolyn and Dennis standing, Grandpa Will standing, me standing. I didn't yell. I didn't plan a speech, but something had settled into place inside me over the last 40 minutes. Something heavy and permanent, like a cornerstone being laid. "I'm not going to scream," I said. "I'm not going to throw anything. I just need you both to hear this." Nobody moved. I spent 2 years wondering what I did wrong. Why nobody called. Why Grandpa's number didn't work. Why I was eating ramen 3 nights a week. So I could make rent on time. I looked at the renovated kitchen, the granite, the new appliances, the gold ribbon on the tree. Turns out I was worth exactly $400,000 and a house. You just decided I wasn't worth telling. I turned to Bridget. Her eyes were red, her lower lip bitten raw. She looked terrified. "None of this is your fault," I said. "I want you to know that." She nodded fast, the way a person nods when they're trying not to fall apart entirely. I turned to Grandpa Will. "Can we leave?" He was already reaching for the briefcase. He collected the manila folder, closed the clasps, and straightened his jacket. He looked at Richard one last time. "I'll have my attorney contact you Monday, Richard. This isn't over." He said it the way he used to say, "Measure twice, cut once, not a suggestion, not a threat, a professional standard." But tonight I'm taking my granddaughter home. Richard said nothing. Pamela said nothing. The Christmas tree twinkled behind them, still and perfect, illuminating a table set for 9 where nobody was eating anymore. I picked up my coat. I picked up my mother's sweater from the back of the chair. The cream-colored cable knit with the uneven hem. I didn't look back. Grandpa Will held the door open. The December air hit my face, cold and sharp and honest. We walked out together. We drove for 12 minutes without saying a word. The snow did the talking. Grandpa Will's Ford pickup was the same one he'd had for 20 years. A faded blue F-150 with a bench seat that creaked every time you shifted weight. The heater worked hard against the December cold, and the windshield wipers kept a steady rhythm, the only metronome in a silence neither of us was ready to break. I stared through the passenger window. The neighborhood slid past houses with lit-up Christmas decorations, inflatable Santas on lawns, strings of lights along gutters, families inside, visible through windows, sitting around tables and living rooms and kitchens. Families who presumably knew where their money was. Grandpa Will spoke first. "Your mother would have handled that exactly the same way." He kept his eyes on the road, quiet, dignified, and absolutely lethal. I laughed. It came out wet halfway to a sob, but it was real. And once it started, the rest followed. I cried the way I hadn't cried since I was 8 years old. Standing in a hospital hallway in socks that were too big for me because nobody had remembered to pack the right pair. I wasn't crying about the money. I wasn't crying about the house. I was crying because I'd spent 2 years believing my grandfather had forgotten me while he spent those same 2 years trying to find me. I called that number 40 times. "Grace," he said it quietly. 40 times. "I almost drove up here last spring, but Richard kept telling me you were fine, busy, happy." His hands tightened on the wheel. "I should have come anyway. How did you find out?" He exhaled. "Dave Kusla, you remember Dave, worked with me on the Rajutst project. He drove past Boatst Lane back in September, saw Richard on a ladder painting the shutters. He paused. Dave called me and said, 'Will, why is your son-in-law living in the house you gave your granddaughter?'" He didn't need to say the rest. I could fill it in. 2 months of calls to his attorney. 2 months of pulling bank records and printing emails. 2 months of building a case the way he'd built everything else in his life. Carefully, precisely, with no wasted material. "The question at dinner," I said, "you already knew. I suspected, but I needed to hear it from you in front of what Nassas. He reached over and squeezed my hand. His fingers were rough and warm and trembling. I'm sorry it took so long, Grussa. By midnight on Christmas Eve, my father had called 7 times. Not once did the word sorry appear. I sat in Grandpa Will's living room on the same plaid couch where I'd spent 100 Friday nights reading and eating grilled cheese. The room hadn't changed. Wood paneling, shelves full of carpentry manuals and old westerns, a clock on the mantel that ticked loud enough to huff from every room. It was exactly as I remembered, and the familiarity of it nearly undid me. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I read the messages one at a time, like turning over cards in a game I hadn't agreed to play. Richard, Futty 7 p.m. Grace, please let me explain. Richard Nunn, 12 p.m. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Richard Tun, Zara Thra p.m. Don't let Dad destroy this family. Curlin called it Tun Thutty. Dumps and I left right after you did. Eid and Dunna were already in Thukka. Pamela threw a plate at the kitchen wall. Not at anyone, just at the wall. Richard sat at the table for 20 minutes without moving. I could picture it. The gold-rimmed plate. My money shattering against the backsplash, also my money. Then one more text from Pamela 11. Zarafa p.m. You always wanted attention. Congratulations, you got it. 5 words. And just like that, 18 years of I care about you, Grace, dissolved the way sugar dissolves in hot water. Quickly, completely, and leaving nothing behind but a taste. I showed the text to Grandpa Will. He read it, set the phone down, and walked into the kitchen. I heard him pick up the wall phone, the landline he'd never replaced because he didn't trust anything that needed charging, and leave a voicemail. Mugret, it's Will Hutla. I'm calling about the matter we discussed. I need a formal demand letter drafted Monday, first thing. Deed recovery, full restitution, and damages. I'll have the file to you by 9. He hung up, came back to the living room, sat down across from me with 2 mugs of instant coffee, the only kind he'd ever made. Your father wasn't asking for forgiveness, he said. He was asking you to stand between him and consequences. He blew on his coffee. You've been doing that your whole life without knowing it. I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat seep in. He was right. That was exactly what I'd been doing. The attorney laid out the numbers on a Tuesday afternoon, and I listened the way you listen to a doctor reading test results. Very still, very quiet, and memorizing everything. Mugret Ultun had been Grandpa Will's attorney for 15 years. She was 61, precise, and had the kind of voice that made you sit up strutta without knowing why. She called us on speaker from her office, and I stood in Grandpa Will's kitchen, leaning against the counter, pressing my thumbnail into my palm hard enough to leave a mark. 400,000, she said. Deposited into Richard Tunson's Juntakun on April 24th, fully withdrawn over the following 18 months. I've traced the major spusaments. She read them like a grocery list. 180,000 debt settlement for towns and mutquucks. The shop that failed. The dream Pamela had cheered for and Richard had chased off a cliff. 56,000. 2 years of tuition at Rudgman Academy, Bridget's private school. The one with the boarding option and the spring break ski trips. 42,000, home renovation. Kitchen, living room, garage expansion, 38,000 the pearl white SUV in the driveway registered to Pamela Townsend. 29,000. Travel, Disneyland, beach trips. A Luckhus rental the previous July. Vacations I'd never been invited to. Paid for with money that was supposed to build my life. 55,000 miscellaneous restaurants. Home decor. The gold ornaments on the Christmas tree. The matching napkin rings on the table. Additionally, Mugret said Richard used the boat's deed, still in his name since the transfer to Grace was never executed. Tusakya a second mortgage, $120,000. The property is now significantly underwater. I set the phone down, poured a glass of water, drank it completely, poured another $29,000 on vacations I wasn't invited to. They used my money to create the memories they excluded me from. Grandpa Will sat at the kitchen table, hensfuldud, watching me with the patient concern of a man who builds things and understands that some foundations take time to settle after being shaken. "What do you want to do, Grussa?" I looked at the glass in Muhind, at the ceiling, at the clock ticking on the wall. "I want to not be here anymore," I said. "Not in this town, not in this story." He nodded. "Then let's talk about that." Caroline set a cardboard box on the kitchen table and said, "I went back for this. It didn't belong to her." It was the second Saturday after Christmas. I was still at Grandpa Will's, sleeping in the guest room that smelled like cedar and old quilts, and I had just started to feel like a person again instead of a funsuck report. Caroline had driven to Richard's house the previous day. Richard let her in without argument. She said he looked like a man who'd stopped arguing about anything. It was on top of the cabinet. Caroline said behind the dish towels. Pamela was using it to hold grocery. She lifted the lid of the cardboard box, and there it was. My mother's recipe box. Oak worn smooth at the corners. The brass hinge that always stuck. The tiny scratch on the lid where I'd accidentally dragged a butter across it when I was 6. I opened it. Inside, dozens of index cards in my mother's handwriting. Tomato sauce, apple pie, chicken soup, pot roast. Each one written in blue ink in letters that slanted slightly to the right with notes in the margins. Grussa loves extra cheese. "Make double. Will always takes leftovers. Don't let Richard near the pepper grinder." I laughed, then I didn't. At the bottom underneath the last divider was a card that wasn't a recipe. It was a note folded once written on the same London Ducks card in the same blue ink in my mother's hand. "For Grace when you're old enough. The house on Birchwood was my grandmother's. I want you to have it someday. Asked Grandpa. He knows." I read it 3 times. I turned it over as though there might be more. There wasn't. Just my mother's handwriting preserved in a box that had been buried under grocery coupons in a kitchen that smelled like someone else's cinnamon candles. Grandpa will read the card. He took off his glasses, cleaned them with his shirt, and put them back on. "Your mother asked me to hold that house for you," he said. "When she got the diagnosis, she made me promise." Pamela had used my mother's recipe box to hold coupons. I don't know why that detail hurt more than the money, but it did. Maybe because $400,000 is a number, and numbers can be recovered. But a woman using your dead mother's handwriting as a shelf liner, that's the kind of cruelty that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet. The text came from a number I didn't recognize at 11, Zara Zara on a school night. It said, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." 2 weeks had passed since Christmas Eve. I was sitting on Grandpa Will's porch, bundled in 2 sweaters and my mother's cable knit, watching the January stars through the bare tree branches. My phone buzzed once. I almost ignored it, but I didn't. "This is Bridget. I'm using Lily's phone. Mom told me not to talk to you." I stared at the screen, then typed back. "Aryaka." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, I don't know, everything's messed up. Dad sleeps on the couch. Mom cries at night, but pretends she's fine in the morning. I asked about the money, and she told me to focus on school. I could picture her, 14, sitting cross-legged on her bed, door locked. Thumbs moving fast over a borrowed phone, terrified that her mother's footsteps might come down the hall. "I didn't know the money was yours, Grace." "I didn't know about any of it, the school, the car, the trips. I thought Dad paid for it. I believe you." I typed back and I meant it. Bridget was 14. She'd been given things without being told where they came from. The way children are given most things, without context, without cost, without the math showing through. "Am I a bad person?" she wrote. That one took me a minute. Not because the answer was complicated, but because I wanted to get the words exactly right. "No, you're not. You didn't make this decision. They did. And I don't blame you for any of it." Pause, dots. "Then Mom says you're doing this for attention." I almost smiled. "That sounds like your mom." Another pause, longer this time. "Then I miss you. Is that weird?" It wasn't weird. It was maybe the most honest thing anyone in that family had said in 2 years. "It's not weird," I said. "And Bridget, listen. Nobody gets to tell you who to love, not even your mom." I meant it. That was the one thing I'd learned the hard way. That loyalty given under pressure isn't loyalty at all. It's just obedience wearing a better outfit. We talked for another 20 minutes about school, about books, about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Nothing heavy, nothing painful. She signed off with a heart emoji, and I sat on that porch for a long time afterward, watching my breath cloud in the cold air. The legal letter was 4 pages long. My father's entire defense could fit on a napkin. Margaret Elton sent it the first Monday of February. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. Address to Richard Townsend. The letter outlined in the particular language that attorneys use when they want to sound polite while holding a blade. The following demands full restitution of $400,000 plus accrued interest. Transfer of the Burwood Lane deed to Grace Townsend, free and clear. Reimbursement of 22 months of rental expenses incurred by Grace. $22,800. Housing she would not have needed had the property been conveyed as intended. The letter cited conversion of assets and breach of fiduciary duty, and referenced the email in which Richard had confirmed the transfer was complete. It gave him 30 days to respond. He responded in 3. Richard called Grandpa Will on a Thursday evening. I was in the kitchen and I heard the conversation through the wall. Not all of it, but enough. Dad, please. His voice sounded like sandpaper on wet wood. We'll lose everything. The house, the cars, Pamela will leave me. I'm begging you. Grandpa Will's voice was level, the way it always was when something mattered. You already lost everything, Richard. You lost it the night you signed that email. A silence. Then I'm your son and she's my granddaughter and she's Ellen's daughter and you lied to both of us. Grandpa Will hung up. He came into the kitchen, refilled his coffee mug, and sat down across from me. I'm not punishing him, he said. I'm correcting a mistake he refused to correct himself. The following week, Pamela hired her own attorney. Her strategy, as Margaret explained it to us, was severance. Pamela intended to argue that Richard had acted unilaterally, that she had no knowledge of the original gift, and that her spending was based on Richard's representation that the funds were legitimate family income. Margaret paused. Then she said, "The receipts tell a different story. The SUV is registered in her name. The school tuition checks were signed by her, and the renovation contractor invoiced Mrs. Townsend directly." Grandpa Will looked at me across the kitchen table. She's trying to throw him under the bus. She's always been good at finding buses, I said. By the following Monday, Richard and Pamela were sleeping in separate bedrooms. I packed my entire life into 6 cardboard boxes and my mother's recipe box. It all fit in the backseat of a car with room to spare. It was the last week of February. The insurance office gave me 2 weeks' notice, a decent reference letter, and a card signed by the whole staff. My landlord kept my deposit, which was fair. There was a coffee stain on the carpet I'd been pretending wasn't there for 8 months. I cleaned out my studio apartment in a single afternoon. 300 square FT of borrowed life. Furniture that came with the lease, a fridge with a sunflower magnet, and a birthday card from a grandfather who had never stopped looking for me. I took the card. I left the magnet. Grandpa Will had made the offer the week before, sitting across from me at his kitchen table with 2 mugs of instant coffee and a property listing printed on plain paper. I've got a 2-bedroom unit in Brookfield, Hesed, outside Chicago. Tenant moved out in November. It's yours if you want it. No rent until you're on your feet. And I know a few people in the trades out there. Good people. They'll hire you if you show up on time and don't make excuses. He paused. You've never made an excuse in your life. I hesitated. Grandpa, I don't want to be someone who takes things from people. He set his mug down. Grace, this isn't charity. This is what family does. The real kind. The kind that shows up. The morning I left, Caroline came to help me load the car. She carried the last box, the one with the recipe box inside, and set it carefully on the passenger seat. Your mother would be so proud of you, she said. She put both hands on my shoulders. Not because you're leaving, because you know you're allowed to. She kissed my forehead the way Mom used to. I drove out of town at 6:15 in the morning. The sun was low and cold. The highway stretched out flat and gray and opened the way only Midwestern highways can, like a sentence that hasn't been finished yet. I had a thermos of coffee Grandpa Will had brewed before dawn. The radio played country music, soft and aimless. The rear view mirror showed the town getting smaller. I didn't look back for long. 6 months later, I had a new city, a new job, and the same old recipe box. Now with a few new cards tucked between the ones my mother wrote. The apartment in Brookfield was small. 2 bedrooms that were really 1.5, a kitchen with enough counter space to roll out dough if you angled the cutting board diagonally, and a bathroom with a window that stuck in the humidity. I painted the bedroom walls a pale blue my first weekend there. I hung my mother's photograph above the stove, a snapshot from the late 90s, her standing in her classroom, chalk dust on her sleeve, laughing at something outside the frame. I got a job within 3 weeks, office manager at a residential construction firm. Grandpa knew the owner from decades of trade shows and lumber yards. He made the introduction. I earned the rest. Within 2 months, my boss told me I was the most organized person he'd ever hired. And I said, "That's because I've been organizing my life around other people's messes since I was 10. He thought I was joking. Grandpa came for dinner every Thursday. We'd sit at my small kitchen table, second-hand, slightly uneven, propped level with a folded napkin under one leg, and eat whatever I'd made from the recipe box. Chicken soup, pot roast, the tomato sauce. Always the tomato sauce. "Smells like your mother's kitchen," he said one evening, eyes closed, fork in hand. That's the point. Every Sunday, I cooked one of her recipes. It wasn't about the food. It was about keeping a conversation going with someone who couldn't answer back. I started adding my own cards to the box. New recipes I'd tried written on the same lined index cards and my own handwriting slipped between hers. Grace's chili sat next to Ellen's tomato sauce. 2 generations of women who handled life the same way, one ingredient at a time. Bridget texted every Thursday. She never mentioned her parents, and I never asked. We talked about school, books, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. She sent me a photo of herself at a school talent show. Guitar, open mic, nervous smile. I sent back a thumbs up and the words, "You're going to be fine, it was enough, for now it was enough." The table was small, but everyone at it had chosen to be there. The call came on a Tuesday in September, which felt appropriate. My father had always been a man for Tuesdays, for ordinary days that he somehow turned into wreckage. I was in my kitchen washing a cast iron skillet when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in 9 months. I dried my hands on a towel, set the skillet in the rack, and answered, "Grace, it's Dad." His voice was different, flatter, thinner, like someone had taken all the air out of it and handed it back empty. "I know who it is," I said. "I need your help." I leaned against the counter and watched a sparrow on the window ledge outside. It pecked at something, found nothing, and flew away. He laid it out in fragments. The house on Burwood was in foreclosure. The bank had initiated proceedings on the second mortgage he'd taken against it. Margaret Elton's demand letter was still unanswered. Pamela had moved out in June, taken Bridget, rented a 1-bedroom across town. Richard was alone in the family house, the one with the new kitchen and the granite countertops, waiting for the bank to finish what he'd started. "I know I messed up," he said. "You didn't mess up, Dad. I kept my voice even. You made a choice. Every month for 2 years, you made the same choice." That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. Silence. Then I was trying to keep the family together. You spent my money to keep a version of a family that didn't include me. That's not together, Dad. That's just a smaller table. He breathed. I could hear him trying to assemble the next sentence, sorting through words the way he used to sort through excuses, looking for the one that might still work. "Can you talk to your grandfather? Ask him to drop the case." "No, Grace. I'm not going to ask Grandpa to drop the case, and I'm not going to send money." I paused. Not for effect, because I needed to be sure I meant what came next. Not because I hate you. Because I'm done being the person in this family who loses so everyone else can win. I waited. "That's my boundary, Dad. I hope you understand it. I hope you don't. Either way it holds." I hung up. My hand shook just a little. I set the phone on the counter, picked up the skillet, and finished drying it. The sparrow came back to the ledge. This time it stayed. The next Christmas Eve, I cooked dinner for 5 people in a kitchen half the size of the one I grew up in. It was the best meal I'd ever made. The tomato sauce simmered on the stove from noon. By 4:00, the apartment smelled the way my childhood was supposed to smell. Warm, layered, lived in garlic and basil and the slow sweetness of tomatoes that had been given enough time. The recipe card was propped against the salt shaker. My mother's handwriting facing the stove like a supervisor who trusted you but wanted to make sure. Grandpa will arrived first. He sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the newspaper, reading the same article twice the way he always did, nodding at nothing. "Smells like your mother's kitchen," he said, eyes closed. That's still the point. Caroline and Dennis came at 5, carrying a pie and a bottle of wine and the kind of warmth that walks through a door and changes the temperature of a room. And then the buzzer rang one more time. Bridget stood in the hallway. 15 now, hair cut short, her choice, not her mother's, a backpack on one shoulder, a nervous smile that reminded me painfully of every time I'd stood in a doorway hoping someone would be glad to see me. "Mom said I could come," she said. First time she's let me. I pulled her inside. She hugged me the way you hug someone when you're not sure you'll get to do it again. Tightly, quickly, like you're trying to memorize the shape of it. I sat down. 5 people, 1 table, no gold-rimmed plates, no crystal glasses, no 12T Christmas tree with catalog ornaments, paper napkins, mismatched chairs, a tablecloth Caroline had brought from home because I didn't own one. But every single person at that table had chosen to be there. 1 year ago, I sat at the far end of my father's dining table wondering what I'd done wrong. Tonight, I sat at the head of mine, smaller, quieter, and entirely my own. I didn't get justice. Not really. The house on Birchwood is still tangled in foreclosure. My father still owes money he'll probably never repay. Pamela is wherever Pamela is, rewriting the story in whatever way keeps her comfortable. But I got something better than justice. I got a table where everyone who sits at it chose to be there. Turns out that's the only kind worth setting. If you've ever had to draw a line with your own family or if you're still working up the courage, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. You might be surprised how many people understand exactly what you went through.